This is the Paul McGUIRE Report. I'm Paul McGUIRE. If you have chosen to walk with God, if you are doing what you can to steer your children in the right direction and have them walk with God, and you pray over yourself and them, then God orders your footsteps and God orders your children's footsteps. And so when they go out into the world or society or whatever, God will teach them, instruct them, and give them knowledge. Now, this is potentially dicey because when you allow your kid to go out in the world unsupervised, there's a lot of stuff you don't want to expose them to because it's highly destructive and in many cases satanic. And we all know the kind of garbage I'm talking about. But that's where you have to embed in them the desire to walk in the ways of God. So when it says wisdom cries out in the marketplace, what God is telling us is that He is speaking to you, He's speaking to me, He's speaking to your children. And God is in the mode of a 24/7 divine download. So He's always downloading into our brains through our perception when we walk through the streets, when we walk in the realms of business or whatever, when we're in society or the culture. God is constantly speaking to us and giving us knowledge and wisdom and power. And one of the ways that God will do that is not in the way that you would not necessarily plan it, or I would necessarily plan it, but God will use it. He'll redeem it. An example will be you have a fear or a concern that your child, your son or daughter, if they go out in the streets, not in the bad part of town, but just go out kind of by themselves or whatever. You have a concern that they'll take up with the wrong people, get involved in drugs and other activities that are not good for them. You have a real concern about that, and you should. But because you've prayed and planted the seed of the Word of God in the hearts and minds of your children, God speaks to them in the following way. They will observe boys and girls younger than them, the same age as them, and they will observe boys and girls older than them, and they will observe adults older than them who are living their lives in such a way that they know that these people are living in violation of everything you as a mom or dad taught them. That these people are choosing to walk in the wrong ways, like they're taking drugs, they're involved in promiscuous sexual activities and all kinds of stuff. And your kids know that it's wrong. Now, the Bible, the book of Proverbs says wisdom cries out in the streets. So your kids are observing reality, and God is using the substance of reality to teach them on a heavy-duty manner. So what do they see? They see played out right in front of their eyes. They see in the streets that they're walking around in. They see the consequences. They see the results of kids, boys and girls of whatever ages, adults at whatever ages. They get to see from the streets. Wisdom cries out from the streets. They get to see from the streets the consequences, the results of going against the Word of God and breaking God's Word. And then they see girls their age or older, and all their teeth are falling out, and their face is emaciated. And it's not because they have a sickness, it's because they could be addicted to a drug that's robbing them of nutrients like meth and stuff. And the lesson that meth and many, many other drugs are very bad is written on the faces and bodies of the kids they see out in the streets. And they're terrified because they don't want to look like that. And then they know those kids look like that because they're doing meth or crack or whatever. Or maybe it's a daughter you're trying to have to walk with the Lord. And she wants to be like all the other girls. And she wants a boyfriend. And the other girls are involved sexually. And yet your mother, the mother, you or whatever, you teach them, you educate them, you warn them about the consequences of sexual promiscuity, unwanted pregnancy, and all of a sudden your daughter that you're trying to educate sees several of her friends or people she knows in school over, let's say, a 3-year period, and there's a certain percentage of them that have gotten pregnant outside of marriage. And they see the destruction and the tragedy and the suffering that is a result of what they're observing. In some cases, they see people trying to do the right thing, so they have the baby. Maybe they give it up for adoption. But they see the suffering and the pain that the girl went through, that she didn't have to go through. And in some cases, girls will pursue an abortion. And your daughter looks at that, and these people don't look happy. They look miserable. They look depressed. And they know, and your daughter knows that their lives are messed up. So God is speaking to your children through wisdom that cries out from the streets. They're seeing life lessons. They're seeing the results of certain decisions and behaviors. And if you mature that, if you shape that, if you sculpt that, if you act like a coach, you can use those things to develop your children into something beautiful and powerful and significant. So that's just one of the ways that God teaches us. Now, God also teaches us about reality. But what kind of educational system do we have which is dedicated to burying in the ground or hiding reality from young people and students and children? Let's talk about the educational system, or what I call the mind control factories. Because that's what they really are. They're mind control factories. They don't really educate. They indoctrinate. They don't educate. They dumb down. Why? You say, well, that's a conspiracy theory. Burp, burp, like a chirping bird, like Tweety Bird or something. Well, that's a conspiracy theory. You know what? You don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy. Knowledge is power. If you don't have knowledge, you're a victim. You will be a slave. People without knowledge are slaves. If you want to be free, you have to have knowledge and truth. Because only a knowledge of the truth, Jesus Christ said, will set you free. So, what is the purpose of education? Ideally, according to the Pilgrims and Puritans, who were strong Bible-believing Christians who founded America in the 1600s, but not only did they found America in the 1600s, the Pilgrims and Puritans, again, strong Bible-believing Christians, but not like today's Christians, because the Pilgrims and Puritans educated their children, and the Pilgrims and Puritans created the most excellent, educationally outstanding schools in America. The Pilgrim Puritan Christian schools were so beyond any other school system that anybody who had any brains would send their kids to the Pilgrim Puritan schools that started at the earliest grades and went up to the university level. And the founding fathers who were not Christians, the ones that were deists and Freemasons, etc., guess where their parents sent the non-Christian founding fathers? They sent them to the Pilgrim and Puritan schools because of the educational excellence in all areas that was given to students in Pilgrim and Puritan schools. You know, think about this. The vast majority of the Ivy League schools in America today, like Yale, Harvard, etc., and others, the vast majority of the Ivy League schools in America today were all founded by Pilgrim and Puritan, strong Bible-believing Christians. And the primary purpose was to educate a student in every area with incredible excellence, but also impart in them a biblical worldview and a biblical understanding of history, law, medicine, government, etc., etc. And the end game of the schools that the Pilgrims and Puritans built, they built those outstanding schools for the purpose of developing and equipping ministers of the gospel of Jesus Christ, evangelists, pastors, Bible teachers, etc. So the overarching goal of these outstanding educational schools was to create an educational environment to equip Christians for the ministry that Jesus Christ has called us all to. That's heavy, isn't it? But you see, unlike today's evangelical Christian, they didn't separate spirituality from the other areas of life. So in the Pilgrim and Puritan schools, they not only taught the Bible in Greek, Hebrew, Latin, and when I say they taught the Bible, I mean they really taught the Bible. But they also taught history, philosophy, mathematics. Did I say history? History again, if I did. And all kinds of areas of science and literature and government, and an enormous body of high-level knowledge and wisdom and understanding. And when you came out of a Pilgrim Puritan school back in the founding days of America, you came out educated better than, that was bad English, sorry, better than all your peers who did not go to Pilgrim and Puritan schools. And not only were you given an incredible education, but you were also equipped spiritually, and you were taught the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and you knew the Bible, and you knew how to compare and contrast a biblical worldview with Greek philosophy, or a biblical worldview with Eastern mysticism. You knew about physics. You knew about art. I mean, you knew about all kinds of stuff. And the result of that, very important, the result of that is that the Pilgrims and Puritans were educating the children that God directed their way. And they took it as a holy calling. And they made sure that those kids, those young boys and girls, knew the Lord, knew the Word of God, and they were incredibly educated. Now, because knowledge is power, this is critical, man. Because knowledge is power, the result was that those children and adults that graduated from Pilgrim and Puritan schools They graduated as people of knowledge and people of power. So what did that do to America, the founding of America, the shaping of America, and the world? Let's just Google Earth search in our fantasy land here and go back in time and zoom in on some of the colonies and zoom in on Yale and Harvard and some of these Ivy League schools that were founded by Pilgrims and Puritans. And what you will see is that God had and still has a unique and exceptional plan for America. This is critical to understand. But not just understand. You have to understand the fact that God has such a deep plan for America. You have to own that truth. It has to set you on fire in your inner man or woman. It has to produce a rebirth in your intellect. You have really got to nail it. You've got to really understand what that's all about. And I talk about it. I explain it in a fast-moving way in my book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World. If you don't have the book, you should get it at paulmcguire.us for a discount. Because it's a fast read, and the Lord will download into your mind, or the mind of somebody you want to influence. The Lord will use that book, as he has already, to download into people's minds knowledge, which is power. So what did that do? What did that do in the real world? Well, this is what it did. God had a special and unique plan for America because he knew what America was going to be about before the foundation of the world. So before the foundation of the world, God had a special and unique plan for America. Just like before the foundation of the world, God had a special and unique plan for you as a person or for your children. Think about this. What I just talked to you about is probably one of the most important things that a person must have in order to be properly educated, because knowledge is power. That 2-sentence brief soundbite of information that I just gave you, when you understand that, it will not only change your life, it will change the lives of many others, because knowledge is power. To think that we have allowed our educational system to free-fall and degrade since the time of the Pilgrims and Puritans, so that students and young people and adults can no longer enter a school building or read curriculum. Students can no longer find the meaning of life. It's censored. It's like, you can't look. We don't want you to see the meaning of life. But when the kids went to the Pilgrim and Puritan schools, they didn't hide from them the meaning of life. The Pilgrims and Puritans showed them from the Bible, showed them from history and philosophy. They showed them that not only did God have a unique plan for America and knew all about America before the foundation of the world, but God had back then a unique plan and a unique and individual plan for every student or child that was attending the schools. Now, God still has a unique and individual plan for young people, for your children, etc. The only problem is that unlike the era of the Pilgrims and Puritans, where the kids could go to school and receive teaching, instruction, and an education in discovering what that unique plan that God has for your life is all about. In today's world, in contrast, God still has a unique and individual plan for you, your children you know. God still has a unique plan for those children. But the difference is today, a child can no longer go into an educational institution. A child can no longer go into a high school, a college, a university, or whatever grade level. A child can no longer go into a public school or even most private schools and find out or be educated as to what their unique and individual plan is. It's as if invisible forces have built giant barriers, giant walls between the children and the truth. Giant walls have been constructed. So the child will not find truth in the school system. Child will find walls and barbed wire fences because an enormous amount of money, an enormous amount of effort, an enormous amount of stealth strategic planning has gone into walling off and hiding from your children and other children the truth that sets us free. Because if we reject the truth which sets us free, then we're stuck with the lie that puts us into bondage and makes us slaves. That's how it plays out. So, children are not allowed to know the truth. They're not allowed to know that there is a God, a creator, capital C. They're not allowed to know that the creator, with a capital C, knew them personally before the foundation of the world, and that this creator, with a capital C, has a specific plan and purpose for their individual lives. But that is concealed, that is barricaded, that is walled off from the child. The child is now in captivity because when you're not free, you're in captivity. The truth shall set you free, Jesus said. When you don't have the truth, you have a lie called evolution. You're in captivity. You're a slave. Okay, so now you need to track with me, because what I'm about to talk to you about, you probably know to certain degrees. You may even know it to a fairly large degree. But I'm going to spend a few minutes talking to you about what I've been working on in my brand new book, Power from On High, in the last 2 weeks. I sit there in front of the laptop 12 hours. I would literally sit there for 24 hours, except I would just drop from exhaustion. Because I am so turned on. I'm so on fire. I am so, it's like soaring. It's like surfing. I mean, I don't have words to describe to you how intense and ecstatic an experience it is to discover the truth which has been held secret. It's a turn on. It's a real turn on to unlock the truth and then to be able to share that truth with others and turn them on to the truth. So I'm gonna give you just a brief little burst of light from the research that I've been doing. I write about these two men in just about every book I've written, because their names are not known to the average person. But to people who know, they know how powerful these men were in history. When I read one of these men, Aldous Huxley, in third grade, I read his book, Brave New World, which was a depiction of a totalitarian future with genetic engineering and a scientific dictatorship, and a world where the scientific dictatorship trapped and imprisoned the masses through pleasure. But in actuality, they used pleasure as bait, and they made the masses their slaves. And Aldous Huxley was not a Christian. He was an atheist. He was into New Age, Eastern mystical stuff, psychedelic drugs. But Aldous Huxley and his brother Julian Huxley, they were the Huxley brothers, and they were part of the Huxley family, they were part of Great Britain's globalist royal elite. They were the highest level elite members of society, and their family was a member of the highest elite levels of society. And their educational level was through the roof. Not that the Huxleys were, because you see, the children of the elite, the real elite, the children of the elite, they get a privileged, deep and rich education. The children of the middle class and the working class get a dumbed down education. Wake up and smell the coffee. Okay, so I read his book in third grade, Brave New World. And within the next few months, I read George Orwell's 1984. Both of these books depicted futuristic scientific dictatorships that were run by big brother governments that used mass surveillance. And they were both warnings of the future we've now arrived in, and they were also designed to kind of convert people into accepting these totalitarian governments. So I'm in third grade. When I read Brave New World and George Orwell's 1984, it was like being struck by lightning twice. Those books had more impact on me than any other book that I had that I had read up until that point in my life. Those two books, Brave New World and 1984, revolutionized my life. They opened my eyes to the true nature of the reality we live in and the actual mechanism, machine-like nature of the reality we live in. And by machine-like nature, I'm talking about in the sense of mind control factories. And you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so these books God, back to our original premise, when we commit our way to the Lord, and back then I was an atheist, so I didn't commit my way to the Lord, but by God's grace, He taught me anyway. God's grace was on me, His unmerited favor. I didn't know the Lord because I was raised in an atheist family. But God chose to use books written by two atheist intellectual authors. They were both atheists. They both hated Christianity, at least Huxley did. And God spoke to me. God spoke to Paul McGUIRE in third grade. It was like getting hit with a meteor. It completely changed my life. None of the teachers in my third grade classroom, they didn't understand what Brave New World and 1984 was about. They didn't get it. They didn't get the message. My fellow students didn't get the message. The school system itself didn't get the message. It was like they had blinders over their eyes. So obviously I couldn't talk to them about it, because if you dared to talk about what was the real message that Aldous Huxley and Orwell were communicating, and how was their message about the future in their books, how does it apply to us today? See, that would have been the most important academic question that should have been asked after you finished reading either Brave New World or 1984. Now, the Spark Notes, or whatever else we had back then, Cliff Notes or something, I think we had it back then. I don't remember. I didn't read it. I read the books. They give you a counterfeit interpretation. But they don't, the people who do Spark Notes and Cliff Notes or whatever, they had no clue as to what those books mean. So I can't talk to my teachers or my classmates or the school. I can't even put what I know in my book report and in my essays and stuff. You see, when I read the books, I knew exactly why Huxley and Orwell wrote the books. I knew exactly what the message of warning was. And most importantly, above everything else, looking out the window that was forbidden in the classroom, I could see the evidence of the warning in Brave New World and the warning in 1984. I could see the evidence of how that was becoming our reality back when I was in third grade. And again, the most important question that any rational, sane teacher or educator would have to ask if they were even remotely intellectually honest, the most important question to ask is simply this: how does, or what does the message of Brave New World, written by Aldous Huxley, apply to us today? And how does the message of George Orwell's 1984 and Big Brother apply to us today? Those, according to what the authors were trying to communicate, according to what those two authors were all about, that is the question that begged to be answered. But they wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. But you know why? Because that would have meant they would have had to take a tiny step of risk. That would have meant they would have had to just peep a little bit out of thinking outside of the box. They wouldn't have to go the whole way outside of the box. They would just peek out through the crack of the box and simply look at American society and our reality when I was in third grade and answer the question: what does Huxley's book and Orwell's book, what does it say about our reality? Does their warning of a totalitarian scientific dictatorship, is it valid for today? That's the only question. No, there aren't multiple questions. There are multiple wrong questions. There are multiple diversions. But if you get into the authors' heads and read their other books, as I did, those are the two questions that, of necessity, have to be asked. And if they're not asked, nothing else is relevant. In the same way, if you read the Bible, okay, Genesis to Revelation, and you already know the answer to this question, what is, above everything else, what is the most important question that has to be asked and answered after you read the Bible. And there are many questions you can ask and answers you can get, but there is only ultimately one question and one answer that triumphs over everything else if you read the Bible and you're asked, if you're supposed to be asked a question. There's only one question that should be asked. You know what it is. You just finished the Bible. You should be getting the proper question regarding the Bible. And there's only one proper question. And it would start like, well, what is the meaning of the Bible? How does the meaning of the Bible apply to me or you today? And it's really simple. The Bible says there's only one way into heaven. Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through him. So the only valid and important question a person can ask or answer regarding the Bible is, Jesus Christ is the only God. He's the only way into heaven. Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. That's it. You can talk about circumcision. You can talk about fig leaves. You can talk about fishing. You can talk about anything you want. But if you miss the question and answer regarding how do I get into heaven and why do I need to put my faith in Jesus Christ, if you miss that one, you don't get into heaven and you don't understand anything about the Bible. Okay, so flashback, I'm in third grade. I can't come out in my essays, in my answering questions, in my book report, or anything else. I can't come out and answer and ask the ultimate question that both authors, Huxley and Orwell, demanded that they should be asked that. And the only question that an educator should be asking is, how does Brave New World apply to our world today? How does Big Brother in 1984 apply to our world today? That has to be asked. Everything else is secondary. And the answer has to be along the lines of Aldous Huxley and George Orwell wrote their books. Brave New World was written in 1936. And Huxley was predicting genetic engineering, television, the sexual revolution, drugs. I mean, how did he know all these things? And Orwell was predicting stuff. You know, the all-seeing eye. In 1984, Big Brother is staring at the mass population through their television sets. So, back when I was in third grade, the only appropriate answer to what are those authors trying to say is they were warning us that right now, at this second, in our so-called free society, we are rapidly transforming into the world written about in Brave New World by Aldous Huxley and 1984 and Big Brother written about by George Orwell. That's it. That's the paramount question. And yet I can't say that. And the very fact that I can't write that I can't say that I can't openly discuss that, because see, that would rock the boat. That would disrupt the status quo. But now here's the clincher. The very fact that in third grade I cannot truly answer the most important question regarding either book, the very fact that in third grade I can't ask the questions that the authors were demanding to be asked, is total 100% proof that we had as an American and global society back when I was in third grade, that it was proof. The fact that I was muzzled, that I had to be silenced, it was proof. It was 100% proof that not only was Brave New World coming, not only was 1984 and Big Brother coming, but it was positive proof, the fact that I was muzzled, it was positive proof that we had already entered into or walked through the door into, we had already walked through the door into a Brave New World. And we'd already walked through the door into 1984. In fact, most of the technology in 1984 came about long before 1984. And when I was in third grade, let's see, I think Brave New World was written in 1945 or something. We were already in a 1984 when I was in third grade, but you couldn't talk about it. That's the proof. So knowledge is power. If you have knowledge. Now, the Huxleys had an incredible amount of knowledge. They were the elite. And so I talk about their backgrounds in my new book, which you need to pre-order, Power from On High. If for no other reason but to grasp what I'm giving you a little taste of now. Aldous Huxley and Julian Huxley were brothers. They were both trained by H.G. Wells, the great science fiction writer who wrote War of the Worlds and The Invisible Man, etc. H.G. Wells also wrote many nonfiction books on the New World Order and the Open Conspiracy. H.G. Wells was also a member of the British elite, and H.G. Wells was the head, the top person in British intelligence during World War I. Now, you have to remember that to understand the Huxley brothers and these other things. So, H.G. Wells personally trained and discipled both Aldous Huxley and Julian Huxley He groomed them, and they were promoted as directors of British intelligence, which is it's like one of the highest ranks. H.G. Wells is the top position, but Aldous Huxley and Julian Huxley are right up there, and they were personally trained by the head of British intelligence, H.G. Wells. Okay. So we have to remember, of course, they don't tell you this in the school system. They don't tell you this in third grade. Because they're invested in keeping you, they want you to be a moron. There's no other way of saying it. So you have to ask yourself the question, as you look at the careers of Aldous Huxley and Julian Huxley, you can never forget that they were personally trained by H.G. Wells. They were members of the British elite, and that they both had these top level positions in British intelligence, they were both directors of British intelligence. So everything you know about them biographically, that has to be viewed through that lens. How does that play out? Well, one way it played out is H.G. Wells used numerous, what they call in the world of intelligence, assets, people officially outside of intelligence agencies that network and spy for intelligence agencies. So H.G. Wells had Aldous Huxley and Julian Huxley meet, and Aleister Crowley, the great Satanist. And Crowley trained them in a variety of techniques, occult techniques, hypnotic techniques. And Crowley was of great value to British intelligence because Crowley was in good with all the occult secret societies that were in Germany and France and Italy and Great Britain and Europe. Crowley had the inside scoop on all kinds of dirt and information and secrets because he could travel freely because he was the great Satanist. So he could travel freely through all the occult secret societies. Many of you remember, I don't know, it depends how old you are. I think it was around third grade. I don't know. I'm guessing on this part. Maybe it was a couple of grades afterwards. It'd have to be a couple of grades afterwards. Because when the Beatles first arrived in America, they were the clean-cut, mop-top guys. But when they came out with their Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album, you see all the pictures of all these very important historical figures and cultural leaders. They're all carefully selected. The people that the Beatles allegedly chose to put their faces on the cover of their Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album is opening the door somewhat to the secret, the great secret behind the Beatles, which I expose in my new book, Power from On High. And you'll recognize Aleister Crowley, the great Satanist. His face is on the Sgt. Pepper's album. Timothy Leary, the Harvard LSD guru. Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World. His face is on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And you begin to see a lot of famous in certain circles people whose faces are deliberately put on the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album. And you see that you're looking down the rabbit hole of Alice in Wonderland, because the people on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band they reveal to you, if you know how to see, they reveal to you the secret behind the Beatles, the secret of mind control, the secret of Luciferianism, Satanism, the secret of LSD, the secret of Aleister Crowley, the secret of Huxley and Timothy Leary, and on and on. And every one of those people that are on the cover of the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album reveal very clearly, if you have eyes to see it, that this Beatles group was not just some musicians from Liverpool, England, who were singing sweetly, "I Want to Hold Your Hand," and "She Loves Me, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah," or however it goes. There's a secret to the Beatles. The Beatles, and I reveal the whole secret of the Beatles, and you should know what it is, because the reality that you and I live in now, the epicenter or the beginning of that new American reality began around when I was in third grade. The doors began to open. Speaking of doors, Aldous Huxley's other book that I read a number of years later and changed my life forever, Aldous Huxley wrote a book called The Doors of Perception, Heaven and Hell, where he advocated taking the psychedelic drug mescaline and traveling through the doors of perception using a psychedelic drug into a higher reality. The Doors of Perception, written by Aldous Huxley. So I was talking about how God opens doors and shuts doors, how God orders our ways supernaturally. When I was living up in Laurel Canyon in the Hollywood Hills on Lookout Mountain Avenue, I didn't know all the secrets that I know now. It has taken me decades of research to crack the code, if you will, to crack the code of the secret of Lookout Mountain Avenue up on Laurel Canyon. You say, where is that? Well, I'll tell you in a second. I lived there with my wife, Chris. We were married. We were strong Christians when we lived there. And, but I didn't know the secrets. I didn't know we had a small home on a like a hilltop at an angle, because it's like a forest up there. And you have, former Governor Jerry Brown living up there, Madonna's living up there, Spielberg's on the top of the mountain. All the big rock and roll groups from the West Coast were living in Lookout Mountain, Laurel Canyon, like Jim Morrison and the Doors. And speaking of which, Jim Morrison named his rock and roll group the Doors after reading Aldous Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception. And here's something else. Huxley lived up on Laurel Canyon and Lookout Mountain and wrote that book, within, 5 or 10 years. Jim Morrison and all the Mamas and the Papas, Frank Zappa, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and so many other big rock and roll groups and certain actors were all living up on Lookout Mountain Avenue on the Hollywood Hills and Laurel Canyon. And so was Aldous Huxley, and so was Jim Morrison with the Doors, and so was Paul McGUIRE. About 15 years, maybe even 20 years after that explosion of the West Coast rock and roll bands. Now, I believe God orders our paths. And I've noticed that in my life that when God wants to teach me, reveal something to me that will further his call and purpose and ministry and mission for my life, that non-ordinary things begin to happen repetitively. And they're far more than coincidences. They're far more than just random chance accidents. It's like divine encounters and God supernaturally leading you to go places that you wouldn't go to in your purely natural mind. But in your supernatural mind, you're being led. You don't even understand why. I didn't understand, for example, and I tell this account in my book, Power from On High and A Prophecy of the Future of America, Volume 1 and 2. You can get all those at discounts at paulmcguire.us. I didn't understand all that then. But in the house that I lived on Lookout Mountain Avenue, literally just 5 houses, 7 houses, 10 houses down, within walking distance, in different branches of time, maybe separated by 10 years or 20 years. It depends upon who or what. But Paul McGUIRE is living on Lookout Mountain Avenue. And I could walk to Aldous Huxley's house, but I'm there 20 years after Huxley is gone. Huxley is writing his books essentially the same month I was born. But I came around 20 years later, and his house would have been, if he was still occupying it, 7 to 10 houses down from my house. And all these rock and roll groups, the biggest names, were all up in the Hollywood Hills and Lookout Mountain Avenue. And not only that, there was a secret laboratory called the Lookout Mountain Avenue Laboratory. But I'll get into that in the book. I'll just close this part of it by saying, at another particular period of time, people from the golden age of science fiction writers like Robert Heinlein, who wrote Stranger in a Strange Land, Isaac Asimov, who wrote I, Robot in the Foundation series, and Robert Campbell, who wrote and directed The Thing, and L. Ron Hubbard, who was not only a science fiction writer, but he was the founder of the religion of Scientology. They lived about 7 houses down from where I lived. It's just that they were there in 1947. And there's a secret behind that that's mind-blowing that I talk about in the book. And I'll give you a hint. It's connected to the Nazi rocket scientists that I've been writing about for 30 years. A lot of people copied me and claimed it as their own, but I was writing about it for like 30 years. Up in that area, Laurel Canyon, Lookout Mountain Avenue, etc., there was an enclave of Nazi rocket scientists that were brought over from Nazi Germany, like Werner von Braun was there temporarily. He founded NASA. And so the U.S. government, under the secret project Operation Paperclip, secretly smuggled into the United States of America about 17,000 Nazi rocket scientists. And many of them were up in the Lookout Mountain Avenue area. And some, like Dr. Willy Ley, L-E-Y, who was the world's foremost authority on what's called the Vril Force, V-R-I-L, an occult force that the Nazi rocket scientists harnessed. And that has everything to do with what's deep beneath the ice in Antarctica, by the way. You see the convergence that's going on here? And every one of those men, when I began to research them, long before I moved to Laurel Canyon and Lookout Mountain Avenue, long before I knew anything what I'm talking to you about now, I began to, doors of perception literally began to open up in my life. Doors of perception and deep understanding about our reality and why our reality in America and in much of the world is a manufactured reality or a virtual reality. In other words, it's artificially constructed because there's an agenda, a plan. An example would be the Beatles. Okay, so these Nazi rocket scientists, if you travel down Lookout Mountain Avenue and you take it all the way to the end of Lookout Mountain Avenue, it runs into another avenue. So, to put it simply, you just keep traveling down Lookout Mountain Avenue in Laurel Canyon, in the Hollywood Hills, and you get to the house where Sharon Tate and other people were brutally murdered by the Charles Manson family. Okay? So Manson, I guess, had his followers. I don't know what's alleged and what has been proven. But anyway, his followers, there was a slaughter. Figures that orbited on the outside of that event were people like Roman Polanski, the film director. I'm not saying he had anything to do with the murders. Just saying he orbited in no social circles. So you have Charles Manson and the mansion that's right there in the center of that entire scenario, that mansion was owned by the Beach Boys, who were heavily connected to Manson and the Beatles, etc. So I exposed the secret because there's deeper secrets than that. And on top of the deeper secrets, the only way you can uncover the deeper secrets is through meticulous research and documentation. And you need to be able to access supernatural information. So, you have Nazi rocket scientists. And then if you keep traveling on that road to the Beach Boys mansion, you travel the road to the Santa Susana laboratories. It's one winding road from Lookout Mountain will take you into like a desert area in a mountainous area where there were the famous Santa Susana laboratories, which were these giant rocket laboratories that were being run by a large team of Nazi rocket scientists and Wernher von Braun, the founder of NASA. And you can see photographs of these of the engines, these giant rocket engines strapped to these big trucks, giant V2 rocket engines going through the mountains. And it depends how you access your information. But if you access information supernaturally along with logic, reason, etc., you're able to see through, for lack of better words, the doors of perception. So what you discover is that there's an entire system of rocket laboratories building V2 and later on the Apollo program and the other big NASA rocket programs. The engines are being tested and built there, and they're also being tested and built in other places in the United States. But coincidentally, this figure, Charles Manson, whose family slaughtered those people, Charles Manson has his ranch, his secret hideout, in a compound that was once owned by wealthy Germans and then owned and lived in by Nazi rocket scientists. But that gets you into Peenemünde, which is tragically where Wernher von Braun and the Nazi rocket scientists were building on a deep underground assembly line the V2 rockets, which they bombed England with. But you see, Peenemünde had a secret, and the secret was on above ground with the guard towers, it was one giant concentration camp. And the concentration camp victims, the concentration camp prisoners, were being forced like slaves to assemble these V2 rockets deep underground. But the U.S. and Britain didn't know at that time that there was a rocket assembly plant deep underground, because when we flew our planes over, all we could see was a giant concentration camp with guard towers. We didn't know that deep underground there were 20,000 to 40,000 concentration camp workers building the V2 rockets, and the guard tower could be used as either a guard tower or a rocket tower to test the V2 rockets. Knowledge is power, man. I mean, we haven't even crusted into the real juggernaut. You're listening to Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us.